Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's class. So today we'll continue from where we stopped in our last class. We're looking at NextJs. So we'll pick up from where we stopped. So I said in our last class that today we'll try to create an application so that we can see how everything works in practical, right? So let's just get right into it. I believe that you guys have been able to catch up with what we did last time. You watched the video, so I think from here we should like have a better pace, right? So we're going to create a little application using this particular application we created last time. So we're going to build a simple page where we'll display user information that we'll get from an API. And then we'll also create a dynamic route where we can display the details of these particular users, right? So let's get right into it. So we already know what we have in the layout. This is like our basic HTML structure where we have our body. And then the children here is every other thing that we're going to be building out, right? So let's go ahead and take out all this from. So I believe we understand that this is just the default UI that comes with NextJS, right? So that you won't be confused. So we'll just remove that. Remove the footer. Okay. All right, so we'll maintain this, take out some details from here. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some content to our first page. So let's say welcome to our user, welcome to our user display app, just to give it some context. And then let's utilize the link. So the link is actually a component provided by NextJS, right? So let's utilize the link. And for the link, we use href. And then we can style it. And then let's say go to users page. Okay. So now we understand that we want to have a route here, right? So we'll define our user routes. Users, then we'll create a folder, a directory, and call it users. So now what we've done is we've created the routes. Remember that the routing system for Next.js is directory based, right? Folder based. Now we can create our page. Can call it page dot just So for our page, FC, let's call it users. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and get our data from a free API. So for that, I'm going to create a new directory and call it utils. And I want to have a file. You can call the file whatever you wish to, right? But let it be something that you know would be easy for others to access or understand when if you're working with a team, okay? So for this, I want to export async function of get users. Okay. Now I want to source should be equals to await. And then we should fetch from this API HTTP as okay. All right. Okay. So now we want to return response.json. Okay. All right. So now we have our function to get our users. That is to get all the users, the list of users. So we can just, and we're exporting it, so we can import it where we want to utilize it, okay? So now we can go ahead and create our user component. So basically we want this component to be an async function, right? So that we can get our users whenever we load this page, whenever we mount this particular page, okay? So we'll go ahead and convert this as a export default. And for that, we want it to be an async function. Okay. All right. Now we have our users and remove this. Hold on, guys. Okay. So basically this should be an async function. So we can now go ahead and import our users as assigned to users. Then we'll say await get users. So as you can see, we're importing get users from where we created this function, right? Now we have get users. So if we console If we log this to the console now, we should be able to visualize our users once we get to this page. So let's say console log users. So if we click on go to users, it should bring us to the users page, okay? Now, as you can see from the server, we can see that we have 10 users here, okay? Are we together? Are we together? Nobody's responding. Okay, all right. So we can now go ahead and add our user, display our users, okay? So uh, let's say user list, and then we can now use a URL, display our user. Okay, so I want to select. All right, so we already understand how to handle mapping. So that's what we just did here. We are picking the users and then we're just mapping it into a list. And then we are adding a link component here so that we can link to our dynamic route where we can visualize each user's info, each user's information in more details, okay? So we have user name, excuse me. So we have user, we have the username, and then let's say view more. So let's include our username here. Let's use a strong, add our username. Okay. And then let's say view more or view profile. Okay. Now remember that we would need to create a route for this dynamic component, right? And also create that component. All we need to do is come into the user folder and create a dynamic directory, call it ID. Okay. Then within this dynamic directory, we will create another page. Are we together? So let's go ahead and help and write another helper function to help us get our data for users by ID. Okay. So for this, we are saying we want to get users based on their IDs, okay? We'll be getting it from the same API, so we can also utilize this. But this time we would be getting a dynamic remember that to use this, you would require backticks. All right. Now we can just simply return our response. Okay. So now that we have this function created, we can go ahead and work within our function. So let's export default function. We want it to be an async function. Default async function user details. And for this, we want to access the params. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and so now understand one thing. What we are doing here now, these params, because I want to explain this before you get confused. These params now, we are taking the details from the route. Okay. So what this param does is it accesses the route, which is this ID, and picks the ID attached to this particular user. Okay. So basically, when you route to this page, it should carry the route, that is users, and then it should carry a /ID. So this is what the route will look like in the browser. Okay, user /ID, whatever ID that particular user has is what's going to display here. Okay, so if the ID is 1, you will see users /1. Now that one is the params that we are picking. So we are picking all the parameters from the URL. Now, if we come here, all we need to do is access the, say, const user, and then we want to await get user by ID. We import that, and then we want to say we need the params dot the ID. So we need the ID. We need to take the ID from the particular user's data. Now we can have an if to ensure that we don't, like, a fail safe, so that if there's no users, we can have like users not found, right? So usually sometimes if your application has like say an error page, that's something you want to attach here, or an empty state, right? Yeah, but I think it's an empty state here. So that's what you want to, that's the kind of component you want to attach here. Okay, so what we've done now is, because we have the user, so because we have the user information, let's console this. We can now visualize okay. So I think that's in the users, we need to import our link. Okay. So once I click on go to users, you see that all the users are populated, right? Users list. Now, ideally, if I click on view profile, it should take us to, as you can see, user 1. So it has brought us to the user with the ID 1. Now, if we check our console, you can see that that user's information is populating here. We can see everything about that user. We can see the user's address, the user's geolocation, the company the user works with, the email, ID, name, and all that information, right? So all we're doing now is pick the information and then add it to the display. Then we're also adding a sort of back feature so that we can go back to the previous page. Okay. So let's import our link. All right. So you can see that Leon Graham, we can access the person's email, phone number, website, and company, right? And we can also display whichever information we want. Now take note of the name. And if we go back and we click on Curtis, we should be able to see information that has to do with Curtis alone. Likewise for every user that has been displayed here. Are we following? Are we together, everyone? Udo, do you understand so far? Dave, do you understand what we're doing so far? Rahim, let me hear from you. Excel, you too, let me hear from you. What do you not understand, Udo? So if you don't understand, please ask questions. I keep asking, are we following? And I see yes. And then we get to the end of the class and someone says they don't understand. Please ask a question. Udo, you can unmute yourself. So please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I wanted to see the helper.js because my it's disconnected. Also, why is it that the helper.js is not named page.js like the other ones?
Well, I already said that you can name this particular file whichever name you want to give it. As you can see, it's inside utils. This is a helper file, it's not a page. There's no JSX written inside here. It's just where I want to. So let me explain what I did here. I can write this function inside. I can write this function inside here, right? And it makes no difference. It still does the same thing. It still does the same thing. So if we go back here, you can see that I'm still getting my users. You see, I can still get my users without. So what I'm doing is I'm teaching you how to arrange your code base for clarity. Now, imagine that for each of your API calls, now all I need to do, I don't need to go into different pages looking for where I wrote a particular function to make a particular API call. All I need to do is come to my helper function where I have written all my API calls or all my functions for API calls and make the change that I need to make here in one location. Then I export it. So this is not something that should confuse you. Basically, anything that is placed inside utils is not the page. Are we together?
Yes. Sorry, that helper page, the user.id get user.id. Why did you this part? I didn't really get it. When you're writing second code, why did you write it? Or what was the use?
For which part? Here?
This get user by ID. What was the use? Why didn't we use the first one?
But I think the name already explains that now. This one is getting all the users. This one is getting one user at a time based on the user's ID. Do you understand?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
So the difference here is that this particular API call, you can see that we're getting all the users. But for this API call, it's the same the same link we're using. But for these users, for this particular call, we want to get users based on their IDs. Now, when we use these params is used to access the particular ID that is, hold on. So when we come to this dynamic route, we are getting this particular ID. This ID is this one.
Yeah.
This person's ID is one. So we are checking the params for this route. Now remember that we are using link. This link is provided by NextJS.
Yes.
Okay. Now what we can do with this link is when we use this link for routing, we can access the params of this link. So in essence, we are checking the particular state of the particular user that was clicked on. Now, when we check that particular user's information using the params, we can access the user's ID when we use params.id. Okay. Now, we
Yes.
want that user's ID to trigger this get user by ID endpoint, which is this particular function. Now, what the function does now is it gets the user information and then assigns it to this user. That is why when you console.log user, you can see the user information. And then we went ahead to display that user information in our HTML. Is it clear now?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, please? No questions. So Udo, I believe this should answer your question. This is a function. You don't need to add const again.
My question was, can you use const instead of using function? Can you just like you have function, you declare a function and then you also have expression and all
So
that?
like I said initially, this is an async function. It's a function. If I want to create a regular component, yes, I can use const, right? But I'm creating an async function. That is why I'm using it like this. Because this function is here, it already does the job that const will do. Are you following? Please acknowledge. Okay. Any other person has a question?
My question is, like this method, this params ID that I use, this method, since you're calling the API twice, that means you're like into array since you are calling it twice. And if you are to take an action in these details, it will not affect, how is it going to affect the home page? Let's say, for instance, I want to delete from um, these details. How will it affect the home page since you are calling them twice, calling the API in two places.
So when you say calling the API in two places, where and where?
In that helper, like you use the page, you generated one, the home page you generated with the first API that you called. I don't know that I'm using the right term. The API that you fetched, you are fetching the API twice. You're fetching the same API twice.
Okay, so
The
I'm not
home
fetching
page,
the same API twice. So this here is different from this because this one has an ID, so it's a different route.
my question is, if you are to make any modification using this second one, it will not affect the other one.
So what kind of modification will you have to do? Remember that
I,
if you're making any modification, you would have to call this route again. Say probably you want to delete. You will have to call this route again. Say something like this. You won't be fetching if you are. So hold on. So now, understand one thing. This particular call that we're making here is independent of this particular call. They don't have anything in common apart from the main URL. They are different routes, or rather, they are the same routes, but we are picking different information from that very route. Now, if you want to delete this user now, remember that you'll be deleting this user based on the ID. Or if you want to update, you'll be updating based on the ID. You won't necessarily utilize this particular endpoint to handle your delete, correct? Acknowledge, please. Are we together?
yes, sir.
Hmm? Do you understand? Please feel free to ask
Okay.
for that. To understand.
My question is, I know if you want to use state, we have to use this client for so that we can modify our um modify the object we have in our modify our data that we have fetched. How are we going to do it? Is it the same principle? How are we going to do it? Because I know that Nest has their own routing method and everything. Is it the same principle? Do you have to use context API, all those kind of things, Redux and the rest?
Okay. So basically, focus on the level that we are teaching. When we get to the point where we will utilize state management and all that, we can talk about, and definitely you can use states. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's just do let's handle delete. So that we can have some clarity. Okay. Okay. So let's go to our page where we have all users, okay? Let's have a handle delete. So if we say const handle delete, and then want to async, we want to handle it based on the ID. Remember what I said? If we are handling delete, we will still handle it based on the ID because we'll be deleting them based on their IDs, right? So now, instead we are fetching, but we now have a method of delete, right? You can say if the delete is successful, we want to console log that, and then, all right. So let's just have this simple code. Okay, so if we bring this here and have a button, then we should have an on click, and then we can pass our handle on click there. Okay. So now we have our on click, and then we're assessing it based on the user ID, right? So we said for each user, we should be able to delete the user from the system, okay? Hold on. All right. So let's see that in action. Okay. All right, so we have our delayed. So hold on. So we are having some issues with our API call. Hold on, guys. So let's modify. Yeah, hold on, I'll be waiting a bit. So let's modify this code. Let's use a use effect so that we don't have too many renders. So let's say use effect, and then for use effect, we want to get users. But then user, I want to set user. Okay. Set users to users. And then let's say I want to have, no, we don't need loading. Okay. Then we can go ahead and catch. In console. All right. So remove this one. So what we do now is have a state for users. Okay. Then if this is okay, we should set user again. Okay. All right. Let's see this in action. Okay, so if we go to our users page, user page is on a sync and open it here. Okay. Hold on, guys, I'm with you. Okay. All right, so it should have been so blah blah blah. Okay, are we together? So let's walk through what we've just done. So I modified this get user function to utilize use effect so that we can control the number of renders or number of time this particular effect occurs, right? And then we removed, so this function is no more an async function, okay? Now, what we did up here, whenever we're using use effect or use state in NextJS, you have to define that page as a client page. Now, what this means, you understand that I said before that NextJS, right, can be used for server-side rendering and client-side rendering. So what that means is we can write server-side code and also write client-side code. What's client-side code? The things that you see on the application. Server-side, the backend, right? And then you can render based on the changes that are happening on the server side. That is when they call it server-side rendering, okay? And then you can handle client-side separately too. So now what we are doing here is defining this particular component as a client-side component so that we can utilize use effect. So if we're using SSR here, that is server-side rendering within this component, we will not utilize use client. And we will also not utilize things like use effect or use state, okay? So now that we've done this, we are simulating, we are setting states. So we want a situation where we can simulate the changes that happen within the user data. Now remember that we are now fetching our data using the method of delete, okay? So if we come here and we click on this, you see that user with ID 1 deleted, and the user is no more part of the list. So click on delete here, that user is deleted. Likewise, this user, okay? So basically what we've done now is simulate the delete process. So I believe this should answer your question. That was Excel, right? So Excel, I believe this should answer your question. You see that I'm deleting, but I'm using the same link, right? In fact, this time it is even identical with what we're using to just fetch only users with particular IDs. But now we have a method that we are trying to utilize, okay? And the method is delete. Now, don't get yourself confused. I can still remove this particular function and create it within my helper here. Okay, so I can say export async function delete user. Of course, we want to do that based on ID. Okay. So as you can see, we want to do that using the ID, and we've written our code. Okay. Now we can just pick this delete user and bring it here and just add it here. By ID. Excel, are you following now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Udo, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Unmute.
Okay. You talked about having a client side and a server side.
Mhm.
Now, when the client side, like you said, is for how you want it to look on the UI. Now, there are some things, some files. Now, which files or pages do you use as server side? I don't know if I'm asking my question well. And which one do you use as client side? As in,
Okay.
when do
So
you determine which
yeah.
one
So
should
let
be
me explain that
client
to you.
side
Okay.
and which one should be server side? Is it the utils that is the server side or something?
Okay, so like I said, we don't need to get ahead of ourselves. We'll get to SSR eventually. But I'll just explain a little. So when we talk about server side, we are looking at backend API. Now, backend is not something you can visualize on the browser. Backend basically just actions like the routes to take particular type of actions. So as it is right now, this hold on. So this route here is the backend we are using. It's a free backend that we are using for the purpose of this class. Okay. Now, assuming we want to create your own routes, which we will get to eventually, you will need to create an API folder. Now, within this API folder is where you write out your different routes. So if you want to create an endpoint to get users, you create it within this API route. So like I said, we don't need to get ahead of ourselves. Now, understand one thing, that anything that has to do with client side, we're talking about front end. Server side, back end. Do you understand? For people who are now full stack developers, they can handle both back end and front end, right? But in our class, we are handling front end, basically. Now, when we talk about these pages utilizing server-side rendering, now that's a technique that is part of NextJS functionality, one of NextJS superpowers, that you can create your application for performance reasons, create your application to render based on what happens in the backend. So in essence, we are saying if the backend is not successful, the page should not load, the page should not render. I don't know if you understand. So we are controlling the page and everything that happens on the page based on the server response. So like I said, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We would treat SSR eventually then. I'm sure you understand better by then. Now, if we want to handle SSR in this particular application, we will not use useState. We will use the methods that are particular to server-side rendering. Okay? In order for us to use useState and use effect, we need to define up here that this is a client use. We need to define use client up here in order for us to utilize useState. In fact, in order for us to use React hooks. Are you following now, Udo?
Yes.
Good. So remember that when we're not using use effect and use state, when we're just using it as an async function, we did not need to add this use client. But as soon as we introduced hooks, we needed to add this use client before. Now, if I remove this use client, it is going to throw an error. So if we come here, you should see this error. Right? You see that use effect. You are importing a component that needs use effect. This React hook only works in a client component. Are you following? Now I say to fix, mark the file or its parent with the use client directive. So once we go back here and mark it with this directive, and we come back, we can visualize our UI again. Do you understand now? Is it clear? Okay, so Excel, are you good? Is Excel here? Okay. So Amos, we haven't heard from you, David Amosu. David Amosu, we haven't heard from you. Rahim, are you good? Do you understand so far? Okay, all right. Okay. Then David, how about you? Okay, all right, excellent. Okay, so that's like basically we have been able to create an application that displays our users, views the user dynamically, and also deletes the user. Okay. I believe this is something that would help you with the task that I was given for this week. So I hope you guys are already on it. You should start building out your code by now. All right, so let's look at the same application, but using the pages directory. Okay. Hold on, guys. Okay. So we have our index. So basically we can just lift what we need from here for the index. That'll be a page. So we can maintain this. Okay. Okay. Are we together? So let's hold on. Let's move into okay. Okay, that's so that we don't get confused, okay? So let's go ahead. So let's create our user. So within the pages now, you see that we have a users directory, right? So this is what I was explaining before. As you can see, you see API is here. And this is an API route that has been created here already on default. So we can remove this. We're not working with that today. So for our user, let's do the same thing, okay? Okay, so let's start with importing our data, right? Let's export async function. That's static. Oops. So what this function does is this function runs at build point. That is when the application is building, it runs to fetch the data. So when you load this page, it runs this particular function. Remember, we used this in our last example. So there's a const, and then rest equals to, yeah, we use the same APIs. Okay. And yes, we just pass in the user. Okay. Then we return the user as props. Let's call this users page. All right. For default function. Okay. I want to access users. Okay, so hold on, guys. Okay. Why we still having this? Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Let's go on and implement other parts of our code, right? So let's call these users list. Oh, use link, yeah. So let's see the console first before we come back and fix this. Link is not defined. Hold on, guys. Home. Okay. So it says the page could not be found. Okay, so we've not actually given it the route. This is new users. Okay. All right, so as you can see, we have our data here, okay? So let's display the data that we've gotten. Those are details. Okay, and then we'll dynamically route users/ID user.id. Okay. Remember when using this, you utilize backticks. Okay. So we have our dynamic route here, but we haven't created our dynamic route yet. Okay. So what we'll do now for dynamic routing for this pages structure, we'll create a new file inside the users folder, And then this new file will be called id.js. So is anybody lost so far? So if you notice, for the other pattern, for when we're working here, you see that we created a directory called ID and then created a page inside that directory, right? But when working with the pages structure, we did not create a directory for it. All we did was create a page, a dynamic page directly inside the user's page. Okay. So now what happens here is we can now get all our information within this. We can now display our users' information within this, and it is always going to pick the ID, just the way it did with the app pattern. Okay, serve the same purpose. So if we come here now, let's visualize what our UI looks like. Okay, so user details, user details, user details. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and create our dynamic route. Let's export our sync again. Get static data. Yeah, this should work. Okay, so now remember that we are now getting the same static data. That is, we want to get the user data here. Then we check the paths. We want to access the paths. That is, we want to bring the URL. We want to access the URL for each user and then stringify it. Now we are returning the path, and then we are adding a fallback of false. So what we want is this part. Now we create another export async where we are going to be utilizing params like we did before to call this API based on the params.id. So we are doing the same thing we did here now and passing the information as props. Okay, but now you see that it's only user. So ideally, when this is triggered, we should be able to get the params. We should be able to get the users based on the user's ID. Okay. Let's go ahead and display our user information. Okay. All right. So let's export default, and this should give us, okay, user details page, and then we are accessing the user props, users props. And we can have our return. And let's use the name. Okay. All right. we should still be able to go back one page, right? So we've added our back page, our link to take us back to the previous page, okay? So now if we save this, we should be able to now view our user details, okay? And we should be able to go back. Are we together? I need response, please. Are we together? Udo, do you understand so far? Excel, are you following?
Sorry, my network keep kicking me. I see
Okay.
the function that I wrote above it before the this export default function.
Okay. So now let me explain what this function does, right? So basically in this scenario now, right? Are you with me now?
Yes, sir.
This function simply tells Next.js which user's page to generate at build time. So this function here is saying generate a particular user page. That is, generate a particular user page as params. Are you following? Now, we can now do our actual API call here now. So when we run this API call and pass the params here, we can access the ID. Then we want to use it as a prop, okay? Now, what we need to do is pass that prop here, and we should be able to visualize our user information. Likewise, what we did here, okay? So you see that for this page, we did not need to define, we did not need to give the Next.js this instruction because we are not trying to get anything dynamic there. All we needed to do was call our API and pass the result to our application to our page as props, right? And then we're able to display the user's information. That is the list of users. Now for this, since this now knows because of this function, the application now understands what user information to bring down. Then we now make our API call and do the same thing, right? Now we can easily pass our information to our UI and display. Now, if you notice, we did not add use client up here, right? Because we're not using anything that has to do with use effects or use states in this particular component. Are we good now? Do you understand now? Udo, I just did.
That user, where is the information coming from? The user that is inside the props, the data, where is it coming from that is stored inside our user?
Yeah. So what this means is, which of the user are you talking about? This one? Is it here?
Yes. This. Okay.
This one, right?
Yes.
So as you can see, we are returning a prop here of users. We were passing that prop to this function.
Yeah, I've I got it. I got it.
Okay. Udo, how about you? Are you good? Rahim, do you understand what's going on? All right, okay, cool. Rahim, are we together? Amosu, would like to hear from you. Are you good? Are you following? Okay, all right, cool. Okay. So I think with that, if everybody understands so far, then I believe we have come to the end of this particular class. So we'll continue from there. Probably next week we'll be looking at some other higher level concepts in Next.js. And then hopefully soon we can look at SSR, server-side rendering. Yeah, Udo, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay. My question now is, okay, from this class, I understand that there are two setups for Next.js, the page and the folder. Okay, my question now is, which one is more effective? And then I have two questions actually. The second one now is, must you style with Tailwind? The Next.js does not give room to style with other methods of styling, or
So
it
you can
does.
you can manually install other methods, other tools for styling if you want. Like this is a React framework, so you can do almost everything that you can do in React here. The only difference is that there are some concepts that are a little bit different, like you've noticed already, like the routing and others that I mentioned in our last class. Okay, do you understand?
Yeah, okay. The routing is different. In the Next.js, you don't need to like import React routing. Like
Yes.
from what I understand, you route with folder routing or something like that.
Yeah, that's
Um, okay, so
directory
what
based
I'm now asking is that, sir.
directory based routing.
Okay, directory based routing. All right. So for the pages, how do you do the routing too?
So I believe that you watched the last class.
No, I've not.
Yeah, I think that's why you're asking that question. So go back and
Oh,
watch the last class.
okay. Hmm.
Yeah. Then for your question, for the first question you asked, you can use them basically based on what you want to achieve, right? So if you're using the app directory structure, that means you are starting a new project. Say, well, you're using the latest version, right? That is Next.js 13 plus. And then you probably want a better flexibility with layouts, your loading states and server components. So basically the app directory structure gives you a better way of handling your layouts, loading states, and also the server components, right? Then you can stick with pages if you are maintaining a legacy code. So what that means basically is that pages is old. Do you understand? And the new method is the app method. So maybe you are maintaining a legacy app, meaning you are maintaining somebody's like an old code base, right? Of course, you won't be changing the folder structure because that one is already implemented and it was probably created a long time ago. All right. And so with that, you rely heavily on get server-side props or get static props. Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I saw another hand up, Excel. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for dragging you back. That that param, please can you explain it again? Really the structuring and how they get the information.
Which of the params, please? This one?
Number 15 and number 9. This one, yes. 15 and 9.
Okay, so you understand? You don't understand what's happening here?
I know that we call the user ID. The user ID is stored in the
So what we are
ID.
doing, so yeah, hold on. So what we are doing here, right? We are creating a list of parts, right? And then for that list of parts, we want to have, for params, right? We want to have the IDs of each user. So what we have done here is create a list for each user, list of params that should contain just the IDs of each user. So we want something like this. So if we check params, params should contain, say, ID, ID 1. Okay. Good. So param should contain ID of 1 like this. Now we are insisting on picking a particular user at a time. Okay. So what happens now is that for each user that is selected, this ID is updated dynamically. Okay. So we're now creating that params and then passing it, like we are returning it to this function. You see that we are using get static parts here, not get static props. So all we need to do now is, since we have created the params now, we have created that list, we can pass that list as a prop to this function to get our static props. Now, when we get our static props, we can now return that static props and then access it here in this function. Are you following?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so yeah, that's basically what we are trying to do here. So the fact that we're returning it in this component, we can just access it here. We can pick the props directly from, because this get static props is providing this user data for this component, for this function. Do you understand? So this one provides the params for this one, and then get static props provides the user information for our user details page. Yeah, hold on, you can unmute.
Okay, so that means that the params it's not only tied to ID. The params can be, perhaps I just want to get the user's surname, or I want to get the user's, assuming the user has age or something. I can use params to
Yes, definitely
extract it then. Okay.
Yes, definitely. Exactly. Any other question? Remember when we're in the app here, remember how we assessed the params inside our dynamic route? Okay. Are you following? Because of the way this routing system is structured. Just attaching this ID alone and utilizing the link gives you the provision to access the information of each user that is routed to this page. So when you route to this particular ID page, it automatically generates that particular user's information. So for you to access that user's information, you utilize the params to extract the user information, right? Like ID. Now, you now utilize that ID to get the user from the API. So you're now saying inside this API, I want to get the information of so and so person. And then you now assign that information to user. Do you understand? Udo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I thought you were addressing Excel.
Okay. Do you understand now?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. Any other question? Any other question, guys? Okay. In the absence of questions, I think we've come to the end of today's class. Thank you everyone for joining. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a great day and a great weekend ahead. Bye, guys.